Announcements got applause. That's awesome. Man, I could tell that it's, we are affected by the weather here in Seattle because when the sun's out, we worship with a little more pep in our step, right? Dawn walked in and she's like, what's with everybody's in a good mood today? It's because the sun came out, right? That's exactly what happened. We've been in hibernation for a long time. So I hope that doesn't change because we're looking at a passage that we're really only doing because we promised to do the miracles of Jesus in the book of Matthew, and this is one of the miracles. But it's not an easy passage, so let's get into it. Matthew 8, 28 through 34. When Jesus arrived on the other side of the lake in the region of the Gadarenes, two men who were possessed by demons met him. They came out of the tombs and were so violent that no one could get through that area. They began screaming at him, "Why are you interfering with us, Son of God? Have you come here to torture us before the appointed time?" There happened to be a large herd of pigs feeding in the distance, so the demons begged, "If you cast us out, send us into that herd of pigs." "All right, go," Jesus commanded them. So the demons came out of the men and entered the pigs, and the whole herd plunged down the steep hillside into the lake and drowned in the water. Are you with me so far? The herdsmen fled to the nearby town, telling everyone what had happened to the demon-possessed men. Then the entire town came out to meet Jesus, and they begged him to go away and leave them alone. There you go. So because we live in post-Christian America in 2026, it might be hard for us to digest a passage like this that speaks of evil and demon possession. We don't have a lot of overt experience with demon possession and evil on the streets of Woodinville, right? But that doesn't mean that these things don't exist. It doesn't mean that they're not there. It doesn't mean that evil isn't influencing people, that evil isn't shaping culture, or that evil isn't even influencing policy. If we were missionaries, though, somewhere else in the world, we would have a totally different, especially in the developing world, we'd have a totally different view of evil and spiritual activity than we do in Woodinville in 2026. When I was a lead pastor at Greater Portland Bible Church, we had missionaries, basically a reception for missionaries from Africa. And they told these amazing firsthand stories about what God was doing in their part of the world. They told stories about demon possession and dark spiritual activity and healing stories that bordered on resurrection stories. And I was like, you know what? So I asked the missionaries, like, why don't we ever hear about stories like this happening in the United States or in Europe? And they said, because you're not desperate enough for Jesus to experience these things, and your indifference makes you a very low priority to Satan, right? And I was like, oh, tell me what you really think. So I was in Haiti in 1990. Got a picture of it here. I'm the good-looking guy in the Yankees cap in this picture. While we were in, I don't know why I'm wearing a Yankees cap, but probably because I was vain enough to think my hair was bad for that picture. While we were there, we were in Port-au-Prince in a market in the capital, and we got aggressively and violently attacked by a witch doctor. It wasn't the first witch doctor we'd seen in Haiti. We'd seen several others, but most of the other witch doctors just swore at us. It was like the only English they knew was a word that started with an F, and so that's what they would say to us. But this particular witch doctor, she knew that we were Christians, and she wanted us out of her country. And so she came after us, and our instinct was to run because that's what our guides did. If the locals were running, then you run. So we ran, and I can tell you that I've never had an experience like that one. I never had one in my life before, and I haven't had one quite like it since, where it was obvious that you're standing in front of somebody who is embodied by evil. So I was looking at a human being that didn't really look altogether like a human being, and certainly didn't sound like a human being. So it was intense. The Apostle Paul's words in Ephesians 6:12 are just as relevant today, regardless of what our experience may be here in Woodinville, as they were when he wrote them, 2,000 years ago. For we're not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers, authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. Warren Wiersbe said this about Jesus' interaction with these two guys in Matthew 8. The entire scene seems very unreal to us who live in so-called modern civilization, but it would not be unreal on any mission field. In fact, some theologians believe that demon possession is becoming even more prevalent in today's modern society. And so none of us, I don't think any of us in here would deny the existence of evil in our world. We may not see witch doctors and demon-possessed people on the streets of Woodinville, but evil is becoming more and more prevalent in our culture. We need only look at mass shootings in schools that are perpetrated by children on children. That alone is evidence. The number of those that happen alone are evidence that evil is on a rise. When that becomes commonplace, which it almost is in our country, evil is definitely on the rise. And so in the culture that Jesus lived in, they had a very acute sense of the spiritual, and they believed very much in spiritual warfare, though they may have called it something different. But as highly educated Westerners, it may be difficult for us to take this in. We may look at a story like this, or we may hope to look at a story like this and say, look, these are people without any concept of psychiatry or psychology, right? So they don't have terms for antisocial behavior or schizophrenia or dissociative disorders. So what they're really dealing with here isn't spiritual warfare as much as it's mental illness, right? So can we just say that it's mental illness? That would be great. It'd be easier. It would make this more plausible and easy for us to digest. Except the problem with that is Matthew 4:24. Look at the 1890 Darby Bible, which was written before politically correctness. It says, in his fame, meaning Jesus, went out into the whole of Syria, and they brought to him all that were ill, suffering under various diseases and pains, and those possessed by demons and lunatics and paralytics, and he healed them. The Lexham English Bible cleans it up for us a little bit, says this, using less offensive language. And a report about him went out throughout Syria, and they brought to him all those who were sick with various diseases and afflicted by torments. That's mental illness. Demon-possessed and epileptics and paralytics, and he healed them. So as ancient and primitive as the people of first century Palestine may have been, they were savvy enough to differentiate between illness and disease and paralysis and epilepsy and demon possession, right? And mental illness. They were all different categories for them. And Jesus himself believed in demonic oppression. He believed in demonic possession because he experienced it firsthand. He had firsthand knowledge and experience with this. So we can't simply suspend disbelief on a passage like this and take it with a grain of salt. Not if we want to know the real Jesus. To know and understand the real Jesus and follow the real Jesus is to believe what Jesus believed. And he believed in and experienced demon possession. And so what Jesus did for these demon-possessed guys in Matthew 8, he's done for us. The all-powerful God of the universe has willingly confined himself to the limitations of humanity. When Jesus came into the world, he came in just like you and me in many ways. He got cold, and he got hot, and he got angry, and he got sad, and he had joy, and he was happy. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he experienced a depth of fear that we hope never to experience in our life. And on the cross, he experienced unimaginable and unbearable pain. Yet he lived a perfect life, and he lived without sin. And because he did, I co-opt the Tim Keller's line every week. Jesus lived a life we couldn't possibly have lived, and he died the death we should have died. And he did it all for us so that we would be free of the consequences of our sin and brokenness. And that's an amazing gift for us to receive. Complete forgiveness, total grace, without us having to do anything to deserve it. The only thing we have to do to receive it is believe it and receive it. Matthew 8 here, it tells us there are two men, but Mark and Luke tell us that there was one. There probably were two men, but Mark and Luke focus on the guy that interacted more with Jesus and probably the one who was more affected by this possession. And because Mark tells us more about the story, gives us more detail, we are going to stay in Mark and look at Mark. So Mark 5, verse 1 says, when Jesus climbed out of the boat, immediately a man possessed by an evil spirit came out from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the burial caves and could no longer be restrained, even with a chain. Whenever he was put into chains and shackles, as he often was, he snapped the chains from his wrist and smashed the shackles. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Day and night he wandered among the burial caves and the hills, howling and cutting himself with sharp stones. And when Jesus was still some distance away, the man saw him, ran to meet him, and bowed before him. So this guy is possessed by a demon. As we'll see, he's possessed by a lot of demons. And even though that's the case, he can't keep himself from running to Jesus. He can't keep himself from going to get as close to Jesus as he can and from worshiping Jesus, because that is the power, the compelling power of who Jesus is. That is the compelling power of his love. His love is so great that this guy had to be with him. He had to be free no matter what the demons were wanting to do inside of him. So often, we talk about this quite a bit. When we sin, when we blow it, we don't gravitate towards Jesus. We move away from him. We move away from him because we're afraid of what he might do to us because of what we've done. We are afraid to throw ourselves like this guy did at the feet of Jesus because we're afraid he's going to punish us instead of giving us his mercy. Well, I can tell you, he doesn't punish us when we do that, and he always shows us his mercy. And we need only look at the story of the prodigal son. Look at what God does when we are guilty, when we're broken, when we're repentant, when we're grieving our sin. He runs to us. He runs to us. He covers our face with wet, sloppy kisses. He doesn't stop telling us how much he loves us. He protects us from others who might want to retaliate for what we've done against us. And then he welcomes us home as his children. And he celebrates us and he even throws a party for us. That's what God does when we blow it and recognize that we blow it and begin to move towards him. And if we judge ourselves too unworthy to be forgiven or too unworthy to receive God's mercy, what we're really doing is putting ourselves on God's throne and making judgments that we're just not qualified to make. And we're getting it wrong when we do that. No matter who we are, no matter what we've done, no matter what we've neglected to do, Jesus pursues us. And he pursues us with a relentless tenderness. And he covers us with his love, and he offers us mercy and freedom and restoration and redemption. It's what he offers us. It's exactly what he offered this guy in Mark 5. Look at the condition this guy was in before Jesus arrived. He's naked. He's living among the caves that they used as tombs along the shore of the Sea of Galilee. And at night, he roamed the hillside along the Sea of Galilee, shrieking and howling out in utter agony and torment. That was his life. He's so completely tormented that he cuts himself with stones. And some people said, well, maybe that's demonic worship that he's doing. Because remember in 1 Kings when the prophets of Baal are having the showdown on Mount Carmel with Elijah, when they called out to their god Baal, they cut themselves until the blood gushed out in order to get their god's attention. I don't know. Maybe. But probably, no doubt this guy's tormented. I don't know if he's worshiping Satan, but he's definitely tormented. And this guy has superhuman strength, but he's absolutely powerless against the forces of evil that control his life. Look at how the Bible describes Satan in a couple places. Revelation 9:11. Their king is the angel from the bottomless pit. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek, Apollyon, the destroyer. John 10:10 says, the thief's purpose is to steal and kill and destroy. Satan is the source of all evil in our world, and his main objective is to destroy what God has created, starting with you and me. That is what he does. And as a result, society has no power over his brand of evil. Society has never had power over his brand of evil. Look at what happened in Mark 5. When this guy, however he ended up the way that he did, the way that society tried to deal with it is they bound him. They at first probably bound him with leather straps or whatever, and that was good enough for a time, but then he broke free. But then they overpowered him again and thought, well, we need stronger bonds, so they bound him with chains, and that worked for a while until he got so strong that even the chains couldn't bind him. So for a time in this guy's life, there were enough people in society who cared enough to put themselves at risk to overpower him and subdue him for his safety and his own good and for their safety and their own good until they couldn't anymore, until his strength grew so strong that nothing they did mattered. It says in Mark 5, verse 3 in the NLT, he could no longer be restrained even with a chain. In the ESV, it says, and no one could bind him anymore. His strength grew so strong that there's nothing they could do. And this man then ended up exactly where Satan wanted him, which is exactly where Satan wants you and me. Alone, isolated, and wandering aimlessly through our lives in a great deal of pain with no purpose. He's tormented, he's howling out in agony, and he's cutting himself with rocks. And such is the power of evil in our world. And our society acknowledges the problem of evil. We absolutely do. But our society also believes that evil is a human condition, that evil is a human phenomenon. And because it's a human phenomenon, we can use human means and human methods to overcome it. But how's that going? It's not going so great. Even with all our advances, even with all our education, evil is not getting better. It is getting worse. If this guy lived in 2026 Seattle, what we would probably do for him is put him in a shelter for the unhoused and give him therapy for the psychological torment that he was experiencing. And if he got a little too violent, we would give him those things in a hospital or a prison setting. And for the most part, that's how our culture deals with the problem of evil. It's not solely a human problem, though. Tim Keller said this, we're getting crushed by evil. Our culture radically underestimates the problem of evil. Warren Wiersbe said, never underestimate the destructive power of Satan. He is our enemy and would destroy all of us if he could. Let's look at the New Century Version, its take on Ephesians 6:12. Our fight is not against people on earth, but against the rulers and authorities and powers of this world's darkness, against the spiritual powers of evil in the heavenly world. We cannot expect to solve the problem of evil by reducing it to a human phenomenon and using human methods to try to overcome it. It won't work. Just as nobody could restrain this guy in Mark 5 because evil got too strong, our society doesn't have the tools in its toolbox to overcome the evil that we're faced with. It just doesn't. I heard a quote from a book called, The Death of Satan by a man named Andrew Del Banco. He is a professor at Columbia University. He is a self-described secular Jew who is the descendant of people who survived the Holocaust. And yet, this is what he wrote in 1995, 31 years ago. He said this, there is a gulf in our culture between the visibility of evil and the intellectual resources available for coping with it. And it has only gotten worse since then. So Del Banco, the secular Jew who doesn't follow Jesus, is urging us to pay more attention to Satan. He's urging us to see evil as a transcendent problem that can't solely be dealt with by human means. We don't need to be possessed by demons to have this hit home for us. It hits home for each and every one of us. We're all impacted and affected by evil in one way or another in our lives, either directly or indirectly. Look at what we're dealing with just in our own lives. All illness, all disease, all mental illness, all pain is ultimately the result of evil in the world. And when life gets difficult for us, and we need help processing what's happening, what do? What we do often is we go to counseling and therapy. And I'm all for therapy. One of my undergraduate degrees in psychology, I'm all for it. In fact, it wasn't very long ago that I needed help dealing with the betrayal of a friend that I was in counseling 2 days a week in order to deal with that. So I am all for counseling. It helps us process what's happening to us. It doesn't necessarily help us always with the why or the source, but it definitely helps us with the what and the how. When therapy, and if we're going to therapy, we might also read books, right? If we are struggling with our children, we'll read books on how to be better parents. If we are struggling with our family of origin, we might read books on what it means to be the adult child of codependent parents or the adult child of alcoholic parents or whatever it might be. And how many of us have all these books either stacked on our bedside table or in our Kindle profile, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. Those are good things. It helps us. When therapy and reading aren't enough, we often turn to medication. If And that's what our culture does. Our culture deals with the problem of evil through politics, through science, and through medication, certainly. And so we take medication. If we're dealing with anxiety, there are great medications that help us function better when we're anxious. If we are depressed, there are great medications that help us deal with depression. But just like therapy and just like reading, those things deal with the symptoms often more than they deal with the problems. Tim Keller was right. We are getting crushed by evil. And unless we address the cause of evil, we'll never overcome evil in our world. We need to view the problem of evil through a spiritual lens, through a supernatural lens, and we need a supernatural intervention. We need a Savior. We need Jesus to do what only Jesus can do in our lives. We need Jesus to do what only Jesus can do in our culture. We need Jesus to do for us what he did for this guy in Mark 5. And we get a sense for how evil worked in this. It works in everybody's life by looking at how it worked in this guy's life in Mark 5. And again, we don't know how he came to be possessed. Maybe he gave himself to some sin, and whatever happened, he gave Satan a foothold to get into his life. We don't know, but we know that he's there. And Satan's methods are the same today as they were way back in the Garden of Eden. He's a liar. He promises everything. He underdelivers, and it costs us everything in the end. He told Adam and Eve that if you eat the forbidden fruit, you're going to be just like God, except he didn't tell them everything. They did have an understanding just like God of the difference between good and evil, but they also found great shame, and it cost them everything to eat from that tree. One of the books I read when I was in seminary was Out of the Salt Shaker by Becky Pippert. She is now goes by Rebecca Manley Pippert. She said this: whatever we seek first and foremost in our life becomes our God. So whatever our non-negotiables are, whatever we have to have or have to pursue in our lives, those things become our idols, our gods with little g's. Tim Keller used to also say, any good thing in our life that becomes the main thing becomes an idol in our life. And our idols always end up owning us and enslaving us. I've got some firsthand experience with this. You know, what started out as a chronic back situation in my life, as you know, turned into full-blown addiction to opiate pain medication. And it didn't take long for the line between needing the medication for medical reasons and wanting it for my own reasons got very blurry. And I ultimately could not live without the medication. Even when I got to the point that I recognized what the medication was doing to me and I didn't want to take it anymore, I couldn't stop taking it because I would go into awful, debilitating withdrawals, and it would be painful and I wouldn't be able to function. And so I needed a fix. That's where we get the term getting a fix from. The medication fixes the withdrawal and allows you to be functional. Taking meds every day became my non-negotiable, and ultimately I was enslaved to a very merciless God. And at first, those meds promised to help me out, man. Those meds promised to make me feel better, and they did. But in the end, they cost me almost everything. They almost cost me my life, and they nearly cost me everything and everyone that I love in this life. That's what our idols do. So whatever we seek first and foremost in our life, it becomes a God that we worship. Maybe what we're thinking about first and foremost in our life right now is that we want to be loved, we want to be accepted. Well, if we make that our God, it's going to do great damage in our life. If our desire is to be in control above all else, we'll be in control, but of a very small piece of the world without a lot of people around us. If our need for perfection becomes our God, we'll ultimately be alone in charge of our own little perfect world. If our God is money, we'll be enslaved to it. Whether we have more money than we know what to do with or not enough to pay the bills, it will own us. Because, again, money's not the root of all evil. It's the love of money that's the root of all evil. And all these things which start out as good things, our idols almost always start out as good things. At worst, they are benign. But when they become the main thing, they end up costing us everything. They become merciless gods. If Jesus is not the one thing that we seek first and foremost above all else, then Satan has us. He has us either directly or indirectly. Look at what Jesus said in Matthew 12:30. And he's talking to the Pharisees, but it applies to all of us. Anyone who isn't with me opposes me. And anyone who isn't working with me is actually working against me. There's no middle ground there. We're either intentionally working with Satan or we're inadvertently helping him out. There's no middle ground. So Mark 5, it says, when Jesus was still some distance away, the man saw him, ran to meet him, and bowed before him. With a shriek, he screamed, "Why are you interfering with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In the name of God, I beg you, don't torture me." For Jesus had already said to the spirit, "Come out of the man, you evil spirit." So this man is drawn to Jesus. At the same time, he's afraid of Jesus. He's afraid that if he gets too close, Jesus is going to do something in his life that is going to be unpleasant. We have friends who, wonder, like, why are you following Jesus? It seems like, life would be more fun if you don't follow him, because they're convinced that if we become, and they're right about this, if you become religious, yes, then all the fun gets sucked out of your life. But if you follow Jesus, not so much, right? But that's what they're concerned about. They bought into the old adage that you can't be happy and holy at the same time. But you can be. Evil has a way of hiding God's grace from us. Satan doesn't want us to know how loving, merciful, and gracious Jesus is. Why would he, right? Certainly he wants to keep that from us. And Satan would have us believe that the closer we get to Jesus, the more difficult our life will become. First of all, he'll punish us for what we've done because we know we deserve punishment. And second, he'll make our life boring and just filled with drudgery, lacking joy. And in fact, he does the opposite. I heard a story of a pastor asking a bunch of parents, "Hey, parents, what if your child came to you and said, 'Mom, Dad, I know you think I'm the perfect kid, but I've been stealing money from you. I've been lying to you. I've been drinking and smoking pot and not going to school, and I know I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I'm going to do better. I'm not doing this anymore.'" What would you do to that kid? We might be shocked. We might be a little angry, and those are appropriate responses. But would we want to punish that kid? Would that be our first move? Like, "Oh, wait till you see what I do to you now," right? No. We would, if we sense that they were being honest and genuine, we would forgive them if we were good parents or even decent parents. We would restore them. We would get to the place where we could trust them again. That's what God does with us. Every time we throw ourselves at the feet of Jesus in search of his mercy, he lavishes us with love and mercy and forgiveness and redemption every time. He may need to teach us some things, and those things may be difficult for us at times, but he always gives us his love, his mercy, and his grace, all of which are so amazing and so necessary in our lives that we don't have the ability to fully understand or get our arms around what these things really are and what they really mean to us. Just that we are desperate for his mercy and his grace. Someone once said, we don't have to be really good. We just have to be really repentant. I think that's right on. So the demons in Mark 5, they knew who Jesus was. They say to him, "Have you come to torment us before the appointed time?" See, the demons knew how the story ends. They knew that ultimately they are thrown into the abyss with Satan and they experience a living torment for eternity. And they were not prepared for that yet. It wasn't time for them to go there yet. So now they're faced with the Son of God, the one person who has the power to send them into the abyss, and they're pleading, "Please don't do it." And we'll see in a second what happens. But look at what James says about these demons. James says, "You say you have faith, for you believe that there is one God. Good for you. Even the demons believe this, and they tremble with terror." Worsby says, "Demons have faith and even tremble because of what they believe, but neither their faith nor their fear can save them. Demons believe that Jesus is the Son of God and that he has authority over them. They believe in the reality of judgment and that one day they will be cast into hell. This is more than many religious people believe today," which is interesting. He just took a little dig at the religious, so I included it. Jesus asked the demon his name, and the demon says, "My name is Legion, for we are many." In the Roman army, a legion was 6,000 men. So what the Bible's telling us here is it's possible that this guy had 6,000 demons tormenting him. Can you imagine? Like, one demon would be way more than enough. Other than the witch doctor in Haiti, the only other person that I may have met in my life that was demon-possessed, may have been demon-possessed, was my childhood friend Torben in Denmark. My parents were missionaries there. We lived there when I was a little kid. Torben was my friend down the street. I remember being at Torben's house, and laying in his bed for a sleepover. And for whatever reason, Torben, the 6-year-old kid, had like an 8-inch dagger in his bedroom. And he was standing over me with the dagger raised up saying, "I'm going to kill you." And I believed him. And so I left and ran home and told my parents. But what did my parents do? They invited Torben over to my house later that week for their 5-day club, right? Because it's all about closing the deal with the kids and getting them to pray the prayer. So they had Torben over at our house. And I remember my mom asking Torben, "Do you want to believe in Jesus?" And he said, "Yes." "Do you want to ask Jesus into your life?" And he said, "Yes." But he could not say the name Jesus. And so the more my mom prayed, the harder it got, until Torben ultimately blurted out, "Jesus, come into my life so I can say your name." And I believe that was life-changing for him. There's more spiritual activity in the world than we are aware of. So the demons in Mark 5, they pleaded with Jesus to throw them into the pigs. And so Jesus says, "Okay." And so the next thing that happens is 2,000 pigs plummet to their death off a cliff into the Sea of Galilee. And for the last 2,000 years, Jesus has been taking unmerciful heat for not caring for the pigs. This is definitely not a PETA-approved part of this talk. Jesus didn't kill the pigs. The demons did, right? And the demons didn't care about the pigs any more than they cared about a person. The pigs were just a means to an end for the demons. It allowed them to move on and to go to other places. They went into the pigs, killed them, and then moved on to torment other people. Any issue that anybody should have is, why did Jesus let them do that, rather than why did Jesus let the pigs? And we ask ourselves that over like a nice breakfast with bacon. The herdsmen here, the guys in charge of the pig, they run into the town and they tell the owners of the pigs and everybody else what has happened. And so the town comes out to see what Jesus has done. They see that the pigs are all dead. They calculate how much money that's cost them. They see the guy that was once possessed, that they struggled so hard and for so long to bind down with chains, sitting in his right mind, eating an apple probably. He's fine. And what do? Do they go, "Wow"? No. They go, "What happened over here?" And they are angry that Jesus came into their world, disrupted their world, moved their cheese, right, by killing their pigs. And that's what they cared about. "You've messed with our comfort and our status quo. Now would you please leave?" Because that mattered. They were a lot of things, but they weren't curious. And anytime we're not curious and we start to make judgments, we tend to get it wrong. We tend to get it wrong, just like they did. So Jesus will do amazing things in our life if and when we surrender to him, but he will also sometimes move our cheese. He will also sometimes make life uncomfortable for us for our own good. He will sometimes ask us to sacrifice for our good and for the good of others and for his glory. But it's always the best thing for us to do. Always. So before the band comes, as we wrap up, I'm just going to ask a few questions. Is it possible that you've underestimated the power of evil in this world? Is it possible that you've underestimated the power of evil in your life? Is it possible that you need supernatural intervention in your life right now? So you need Jesus to come into your situation and do what only Jesus can do. What are you pursuing first and foremost in your life? What are your non-negotiables? If it's anything other than Jesus, then confess it, surrender it, and ask God to help you make Jesus the most important thing, the number one thing, because you recognize that you're out of balance without that and subject to the forces of, well, not forces, but yeah, forces of evil as a result. So as we come to communion, as we come to the table, as we come remembering what Jesus has done for us, the sacrifice that he made for us, let's come like this guy did in Mark 5, bowing before him, worshiping him for who he is and what he's done, and asking him to do what only he can do in our lives as we deal with whatever we're dealing with, and ask him for his help to make him the most important thing in our life. Let's pray. God, thank you for this very difficult passage. that's easier to pass by. I'm glad we didn't pass it by because it has so much to teach us, so much to say about our own lives, and so much to reveal about who you are and how you deal with us. God, talking about evil and Satan and spiritual things definitely isn't cool to talk about those things. It's tricky also. But yet, God, we live in a spiritual world where there are spiritual dynamics at work, and those we are not immune from those spiritual dynamics. So God, help us to see where we are in relation to you and in relation to evil. Help us have a clear glimpse of that. And give us the courage, God, to surrender to you. Give us the courage to make you the priority in our life, the thing we pursue above all else. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.